Hello and welcome to this first tutorial in ToonBoom Harmony. Today we're going to be looking at how to animate a bouncing ball. Now this is a staple exercise that practically every animator ever will have done at some point in their lives. It's often used as a test by animation studios to see whether someone has a basic understanding of the principles of animation and how to animate. And it's a very useful exercise to help beginners get started or to try as your first ever animation, because it utilizes many of the 12 principles like squash and stretch. It uses easing, animating pose to pose, timing and spacing, as well as staging. If you don't know what the 12 principles are, I'd recommend going having a look at those. I'll put a link in the description to a video that I think is very comprehensive and covers the 12 principles nicely. So you can take a look at that, familiarize yourself with them, and then come back here and let's start this exercise. The ball bounce tutorial is going to be in ToonBoom Harmony because I'm making these tutorials primarily for my students at the University of Salford, but I'm putting them on YouTube because, you know, other people, there's plenty of people out there who want to learn how to animate in their own time. So if you have the luxury of having a ToonBoom license and you're wanting to animate, then hopefully this video is helpful for you too. I'm choosing ToonBoom because it is an industry standard software, and obviously the students at university are trying to prepare themselves to work in industry, but I will be making these tutorials in Adobe Animate, which is a little bit more beginner friendly, and I feel, you know, easier to wrap your head around as a beginner, and also looking at doing them in some kind of free software like Critter, or maybe using the grease pencil in Blender. So with that introduction out of the way, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create a new document in ToonBoom. This little window here is the first thing you'll see when you open up ToonBoom. So we want to firstly name our scene. So I'm going to call this ball bounce. And then here you can choose where on your computer you want to save it. So I'm going to click on browse and then find the location that I want to save. So here's my folder, bouncing ball, and I'm going to click choose. And then we come here to camera size and frame rate. Now typically a lot of the time I'll animate with a frame rate of 25 frames per second. Doesn't really matter too much, you can choose 24 if you prefer that. This is just the standard that I've gotten used to. So we're going to go with HDTV 1080p 25. So that's 1920 pixels wide, 1080 pixels high, which is standard HD, and a frame rate of 25. Then once you've got all that done, you can just click create scene. Right, so now you can see the interface of ToonBoom Harmony. So on the left here, we've got all of our standard tools. So we've got our selection tool, contour editor, brush tool, pencil, you've got your eraser, shape, fill, a bunch of other tools here. I'm not going to go into detail about everything here because I think it's more important to get animating. That's the quickest way to get used to animating it and to progress. You'll pick up and you'll gradually use more tools as you go along and as you further develop as an animator. So we're going to try and keep it very basic and just focus on the animation for now. And as we go along and as we go through more tutorials, we will be looking at different tools. So the main ones that we're going to use today are the shape tool. We could use the brush tool, but just for sake of ease, we're going to use the shape tool for people who don't have a drawing tablet. I want to make this first lesson very accessible. So we'll be using the shape tool. And you can see here I'm clicking and holding down. It was originally on rectangle, but I click and holding down, I can choose ellipse because we're going to have a circle for the ball. And then possibly the eraser, but mostly we'll just be using this. We're probably only going to use this once, and then a lot of the time we'll be using the selection tool. Over here you've got your tools, and then this thing here on the right, we can see that's the node view. We're not really going to have to interact with that too much. It's more important when it comes to stuff like rigging. So I'm just going to click this tab here, the color tab, and here you can see you've got your color palette. You start off with these bog standard colors, but you can, you know, add and create new colors. Double click, and you know, basically create any color you want and add it to the palette. You can name it. So I can call this turquoise. I don't know if that's the right. Not that we're going to need it. I'm just going to delete that because we don't need it. So you've got your color palette here. Up here, I can click and drag and extend these little windows. So up here I've got my tool properties. So here I can choose, you know, my line thickness and other things, and then library as well. So here you can import stuff, and also we won't be looking at it today, but we can use things like drawing substitutions when it comes to rigging characters. So I'm going to go back on the tool properties there. Okay, now here we've got basically our viewing window. We've also got art layers here. We won't really need to go too much into them for now. And finally we just come down to the timeline. The timeline is where your layers are and your frames. So here we've just got one layer. If I double click on it, it says drawing now. I'm just going to call this ball. And if I click here, you can see each of these squares here are frames. So they represent individual frames. Now at the minute they're empty. I want to create an empty drawing that I can draw into. So this symbol here, you've got these timeline functions. So I'm going to create an empty drawing and just show you. So now we can see here we've got this grey block, and that is an empty drawing. Right, so let's get started. The first thing I want to do is just create a background, really, a white background, so that we can see clearer what we're doing, and when we come to export we'll have a background in there. So I'm going to change the name of this layer, so I'm going to double click on the name and then change it to background, and then I'm going to go over to the shape tool. It will already be on rectangle for you, but I'm clicking and holding down to select the rectangle, and then just outside of these boxes which represent, you know, the edges of the frame, I'm going to click and drag and create another rectangle that basically encompasses it. Then I'm going to go to my bucket tool and come over to the color tab. Just extend this. I'm going to choose white and then click in and fill the rectangle. So that is my background, and then I'm going to go over here and lock it because I don't really want to interact with it at all while we're animating. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is add a new layer. So if we click this plus symbol, we've got a lot of options. Let's not worry about the other ones too much. I'm just going to click on drawing because I want to add a drawing layer, and here you can name it. So I'm going to call this one line because the first thing we're going to do is create a line for the floor so we know where the ball is impacting the floor. So I'm going to click add. And then we're also going to be adding a layer as another guide where we draw the arcs, which is basically the path that the ball is going to follow. So call this one arcs, click add, and then finally we're going to want the ball. So I'm going to call this ball and then click add and close. Okay, the first thing we want to do is add a line for the floor. So I've clicked and held down and selected the line tool, and then gone over here and selected black, and then if I click and drag and hold shift, it will lock this straight. Basically, if I move it around, you can see it kind of snaps at different angles. Okay, so I want it straight. I'm just going to move it right across there, so we've got a floor line, and then I'm going to go onto the arcs layer, create an empty drawing. Now I want to draw my arcs. I'm going to choose a different color just so we can see clearly what's going on. I want a nice smooth curve, come all the way down to the floor. Okay, And then for the next arc, we want to go about half as high. Okay. And again, half as high. And this is because the ball is losing energy as it bounces. Okay. Now this doesn't have to be super neat because it's just a guide. We're not actually going to see this in the animation. Okay, but you can see there I've got the ball gradually, the bounces are getting smaller and smaller until it bounces off screen. Okay, now what I want to do is extend the exposure of this. Okay, so if I click and drag this red cursor here to around 110 frames, and then we want to extend the exposure on these layers. So I just need to unlock the background, and if I click and hold shift down here, I can select frames on multiple layers. So I'm going to go all the way to the last frame and then click and drag down. If I hit F5 on the keyboard, you can see it extends the exposure all the way across the timeline, which is great. That's what I want. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock my background again with the padlock. Then on the line layer, if I click this symbol here, I can affect the opacity. So that's what I want to do. I'm going to bring it down to about 30%. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with the arcs. Again, about 30%. This is just so I can see what I'm actually drawing when I'm drawing the ball clearer. And then I'm going to lock both those layers because we don't need to touch them again. And then we're ready to start animating the ball. Okay, so I'm going to select black in the color here. I'm going to create a new empty drawing. And what we're going to do first is basically create our key drawings. Now the key drawings are basically the important ones. They're kind of where you're plotting the route of an animation. So let's go over here, click and hold down to get the ellipse tool. Okay, and then if you hold shift, well, I'll show you what happens if you don't hold shift. So if I click and drag, you can see I get like an ellipse, but if I hold shift, it locks the proportions so you get a nice circle. Okay, so I'm going to go over here, click, hold shift, drag, and create my ball. Okay, and then if I need to go onto my selection tool here, and if I click on the line work and zoom in a bit, so you can zoom in and out on ToonBoom. You'll notice I've zoomed in using 1 and 2. 1 is out, 2 is in. Okay, and then if you press and hold down the spacebar, you get this hand tool, and you can drag the canvas around to where you want it. Okay, so I'm just going to reposition this ball with my selection tool, just so that pivot point there is roughly on the line. And then I'm going to create another empty drawing here, and let's go back and ring around, select our ball, Control or Command C to copy, go into our empty drawing, and then Control V or Command V to paste. And our next key drawing is here, where the ball hits the floor. So basically the key drawings are going to be at the height of the bounce and when the ball impacts the floor. Okay, so I'm going to go in and put the rest of the key drawings in. So again, create an empty drawing. I can paste my ball in, and here I want it roughly in the middle. And then the next one, create an empty drawing, paste, and then have the ball hit the floor. And it's basically the exact same thing all the way along until we've got the ball off the screen. So create an empty drawing, paste, ball in the middle, Now, if we want to see, if we you know, to keep where you're up to, and if you're forgetting which was your last drawing or the position of your last drawing, we can use the onion skin. So let's click here to see what happens. The onion skin is this layer here. So the onion skin lets you see frames before and after the drawing that you're on. So you see here, so if I go to the third one, you can see I've got these drawings here that are in a faint green, which are coming after this drawing, and then these drawings that are before are in red. So you notice, you see here, you've got these handles, and you can click and drag on those to extend how many frames that you see either way. But you see it's green this side, red this side. So everything before is red, everything after is green. Okay, so let's just add our next one. Create an empty drawing, paste, and we're hitting the floor. Empty drawing. Okay, so I've got all the key drawings in. I'm just going to turn the onion skin off and then scroll through. So you can see we've got our ball bouncing and gradually losing energy as it goes along. Now here at the start, it's easy for me to keep the line in the middle of the ball, but as the arcs get a little bit smaller, I kind of have to eyeball it, and you'll see each time at the height of the bounce, I'm just making the ball roughly half as high as the last bounce, till the fact it's barely off the floor on the last one. Okay, so now we have the key drawings here. We want to start putting in the in-betweens. So the in-betweens are basically the drawings that go in between our key drawings, and these are our first two key drawings here. Okay, so before we do that, I just want to talk about working on twos or ones. So here we can see each of these key drawings is exposed for one frame each. Now, a lot of the time, to save time, because it's basically half as much work, animators will animate on twos. So that would mean that our drawings have to be exposed for 2 frames each. Okay, so a quick way of doing this, say if I click on the second frame and then hold shift and click to the end, and then just drag these along one, you can see now my first drawing is exposed for 2 frames. Yep. So I'm just going to repeat that process. I'm going to go along to the third here, drag that along, and it'll automatically then extend this drawing to 2 frames. So if I just repeat that for each of the key drawings, so they're all 2 frames long. And then for this last one, I've just hit F5, okay, to add, because there's nothing at the end. I can just hit F5 and it will basically extend the exposure again for you. Okay, so each of those is now lasting 2 frames. So if I hit play, you can see there's a very, very quick ball bounce animation. There's not really much going on there. But now we're ready to start putting in our in-betweens. So what I'm going to do, again, is click on this second drawing, hold shift, and just drag these along 2 spaces. And then here I'm going to click create empty drawing. Okay, so now I've got a nice empty 2 frames there between my first and second key drawings. So this is where my first in-between is going to go. I'm going to turn on the onion skin. I'm just going to extend it so that I can see basically the first key drawing and the second key drawing. And now I'm going to paste in the ball. So I'm going to hit Control or Command V. And what I'm going to do is go roughly halfway in between this join and this join, okay? Following the arc. So I'm going to go roughly about here. Now it probably wants to be slightly more towards the second drawing, but halfway, roughly halfway is good enough. Okay. Now let's turn the onion skin off, and you can see if I scroll through, we're starting to animate the ball. Okay, but we need a few more in-betweens before it's going to start to look right. Now, we're going to be, the way we're in-betweening, we do it to incorporate easing. So what that basically means is speeding up or slowing down. So if we ease out of a position, we're going to speed up, and if we ease into a position, we're slowing down. Now, when the ball is here, at the height of its arc, as it's falling down, it needs to continuously speed up, because that's what gravity does. As we fall to the ground, we fall faster and faster until we impact the ground. But then when the ball is bouncing up here, so from the floor to the arc, we're going to speed up and accelerate from when the ball hits the floor, and then as the ball reaches this position again, it's going to start to slow down as gravity takes its hold on it, and then speed up again continuously till it hits the floor. And that's a repeatable process. So what we're doing to achieve the easing out or speeding up is basically going halfway in between each time. We're going to a midpoint, and then you'll see what's happening. Let's just add another empty couple of frames here. Paste our ball. Let's turn the onion skin back on. And just move this halfway in between. So you can see here, this in between now is going halfway between the first in between we've put in and the first key drawing. Okay, and we're just going to keep working backwards, going halfway in between the last in between that we did and the first key drawing, until basically this key drawing is around the 11 frame mark. Okay, so let's just drag these along, create another empty drawing, and again go roughly halfway in between. Same thing again, I think we just want one more in between. Paste, and then halfway in between. Okay, let's just turn off the onion skin so we can see what's going on. So you can see here, what it's done is it's gradually speeding up, because the space in between the drawings is getting larger with each frame progression. So it's going slow, 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 faster, fast. And then it seems really fast there because we've got no in-betweens. So let's just have a look at the easing out and easing in that we're going to have to do on this next set of drawings. So you can see here my key drawing is on frame 11, which is, I feel like the timing should roughly be right once we can see the whole animation and play it back. So if we go here to this key drawing and this key drawing here, I'm going to select these frames here, drag them along and create an empty drawing in between these two. Okay, let's turn the onion skin back on. Let's paste our ball. And again, for this, we're going to go halfway in between. But it's going to be slightly different because we need to slow down or ease into this position and ease out of this position. So I'm going to start by working backwards like we did then from this middle position. So let's just extend and add a new drawing. Let's paste our ball in. Going halfway in between roughly. And again, same thing, drag them along. Let's add an empty frame. Paste our ball in. Go halfway in between. And I think maybe one more drawing on that side. So okay, so you can see it's speeding up as we come down and then slowly building up speed again. So we're at the midpoint there, and now we want to start easing into this position. So it's the same principle really. Let's just drag these along, create a new frame, paste our ball, and again we're going halfway in between. But now we're going to be going halfway in between this key drawing and the last in between. Okay. I think that should be now. You can see there the bounce looks unnatural because I have too many in-betweens there. So let's delete this first in-between. So I hit backspace and just get rid of those and just drag these along. Let's hit play. And again, it still feels too long. So I've removed the first two in-betweens, and if I hit play, you can see it kind of, the bounce feels a lot more natural. Feels like it's floating a bit too much at the top. So I might just remove this in between here. And then I'm ready to work between this key drawing and this key drawing. So let's just drag and extend these, add in an empty frame. The timing and the spacing is really, it's very trial and error. One good way of approaching it is to film your own reference material. So film a ball bouncing and then, you know, count how many frames between when the ball hits the floor to the height of its bounce and so on. Or you can just, you know, go by trial and error, and that's what we're doing here. So that first and second bounce feels quite natural to me. So now we just basically, it's the exact same process for each of the respective bounces. So I'm just going to kind of speed through these, and then we'll go to the next step at the end. We'll come back once I've got all of the drawings in. Okay, so now we're ready to add in some squash and stretch, and if hopefully you've watched the video about the 12 principles, so you'll know what squash and stretch is. But basically we're going to add a bit of a squash when the ball hits the floor, and then a bit of stretch just before and after the squash. Okay, so let's start by just squashing all of the frames where the ball hits the floor. So this is the first one here. So I'm going to select the ball, and then I'm just going to squash it down a little bit. Now one of the important things is we want the ball to maintain its volume. So I might be squashing it down this way, but that means I need to kind of stretch it out to the sides a little bit as well. Okay, so the ball stays roughly the same volume. I'm going to go to the next time the ball hits the floor and do the same thing, but just slightly less squash each time because the ball's losing energy. Okay, let's go to the next one. And then, you know, as we get to this point here, so this one, there's going to be barely any squash at all. It's just almost not even noticeable. And then I'm not going to bother with these last two bounces. You know, there's not really much point putting any squash on because you're not going to see it. So let's just zoom out a little bit and we'll play that through. So it's barely noticeable. I think one thing we can do here, let's just turn the arcs off so we can see the ball a bit more clearly. Okay, so it's looking a bit more cartoony there with the squash as it hits the floor. So now, like I said, we want to add the stretch. Let's turn the arcs back on so we can see what we're doing. So it's basically the joints either side of the squash we want to stretch a little bit, and that's to try and emphasize kind of the velocity and the transfer of energy. So here the ball is going to be moving at its fastest, so let's just squish this, stretch it a little bit, and let's just rotate it so it looks like it's moving in the right direction. So it's at its fastest there, so a little bit of a stretch, and then it's coming out, and then we're going to add a little bit of stretch here on this one as well. And just rotate it. So I'm rotating, you can see that symbol there. As I go to the corners of the bounding box, see I can click and drag and rotate. I'm just going to do that for each of these joins either side of when the ball hits the ground. Okay, and then at this point, like I said, we're stopping adding the squash and stretch. Just because there's so little squash and stretch going on, it's barely noticeable. So let's just turn the arcs off again. And I'm going to put on loop here. So basically the animation is going to repeat for me, so I can just watch it a few times. And I'm just going to hit play. You can see it's looking like a nice cartoony bounce. It's a little bit jittery at the end there. I feel like I need to remove or adjust some of the drawings here at the end. So let's go have a look what's going on here. I think there's a bit of a big jump here. You see, the spacing is slightly spread out between these two drawings. So let me just turn the onion skin on. Let's just move this drawing a little bit closer this way. And then I'm going to add in another drawing here. Turn the onion skin off. Now let's just give that a little playback. And again, there's a little Feels like there's a little bit too much of a jump here. So let's just turn the onion skin on. And move this one. So you can see this frame here is favoring the red square here. So it's basically slowing the ball down here and then creating a bit of a big jump here. So if I just move this along, so it is halfway between. Now if I hit play, that bounce should feel a little bit more natural. And then it feels a bit like it's floating too much at the top. Okay, so turn my onion skin on again. And I'm gonna just move this one, because again that's favouring the red, and move it a little bit more halfway in between. Turn it off. So that's looking much, much better. It's not exactly perfect, you know, I could spend all day trying to perfect this, and you know, I'd recommend that you do experiment. But that's pretty much, that's a nice simple ball bounce in ToonBoom. So now that the ball bounce is finished, I'm ready to export it. So if I go to File, Export, Movie, and I'm going to choose where I want to save this. So I'm going to go to the bouncing ball folder and just call it ball bounce 1. And save. So for format, I'm going to go for H.264. I want it to export all the frames, and yeah, everything here is looking right. We don't need to go into detail on everything. So just click OK, and it will then export your movie. So now if I go to Finder and have a look in the folder, I should have the video file here. And there you have a nice simple ball bounce in ToonBoom. So if you have any questions, just put them in the comments. I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. I am going to do this tutorial in Adobe Animate at some point, and then hopefully some kind of free software like Critter or maybe Blender using the grease pencil, just so that these lessons are more accessible for everyone. And then next time we're going to be looking at how to make a character walk in ToonBoom. So animate in a walk cycle frame by frame. So yeah, that's it for this video. I'd love to know what you guys thought of this tutorial. You know, if there's anything you particularly enjoyed, anything you feel like I missed out on, or you'd like to see, and you know, even suggestions for future videos that you'd like me to cover. So yeah, if you found this video useful or you enjoyed it, give us a like, subscribe. That would help me out, you know, encourage me to make more of these. And that's it. Happy animating. Good luck.